Hello students, we're back. We are in our fourth of 5 units. So this is global resource consumption, which is this mash of all these different things that used to be in different units, and they kind of stuffed it into one unit. And so we're going to see how it goes, but it's a little bit different than it has been in the past. These are the standards that I'm covering here, and I show them to you because it just says that you need to know the progress that we've made and the trends that are happening with poverty and ecological footprint and water and land and energy and all these things. So I'm going to try to hold myself back and just talk about kind of what terms you should use to talk about these things and understanding the trends, and try not to dive too deep, but I probably will anyway, so I apologize. First off, starting with poverty. So here's some different definitions that you might want to know for poverty, things that might come up in readings or test questions. So the only thing that I think is a little bit confusing here is that relative poverty. It's relative because it depends on where you live. So someone who is under the poverty line in the United States, or the poverty threshold, might not be someone who's in poverty in a very low income country. So it depends on what country you're talking about, but every country has poverty, but it's relative. Absolute poverty means that you can't even survive day to day. You have that little money. This little chart is hard to see, but basically how much of the world is impoverished is going down, 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 down. So we're doing much, much better as a world with ending absolute poverty. So there's poverty threshold again. It's once you reach the threshold, then your needs are met. The World Bank says that happens when you get to $1.90 a day based on that country's purchasing power, which is complicated, and we're not going to deal with it right now. See, I already prevented myself from going too far. So in 2000, the UN created these Millennium Development Goals that by 2015 they were going to solve all the world's problems. You might be saying to yourself, Mr. Vandenberg, I bet they met none of their goals. Well, you're almost right. They met their first goal, which was to cut down by 50% the world's poverty, and they did it. So in 1990, 36% of the world was in absolute poverty, and that was when they used $1.25 a day as the threshold. And in 2015, using the 190 threshold, only 10% of the world was in absolute poverty. So we made some progress. Yay. Still, the people that are most impoverished and most need help are in Central Africa, some in South Asia, but sub-Saharan Africa is really the focus of a lot of aid work and infrastructure work. And really any aid that's going to fix poverty is mostly going to sub-Saharan Africa. So we'll talk about Africa more and more as this unit goes on, and see what would work best for them to get out of this poverty. Another important part of this whole situation, which is new to the curriculum this time around, is talking about the global middle class. This is a huge group, and it's hard to tell exactly who's middle class, because you're just not rich and you're not absolutely poor, but you're in the middle. So it could be anywhere from having $10 a day, which in the United States won't get you very far, or up to $100 a day, which would make you fairly well-to-do in some very poor countries. So, it's somewhere in there depending on what country you're in. Really what makes you middle class is that you have a good amount of discretionary income, which means that you have extra money. So people who are in this global middle class, what sets them apart is not how much money is in their bank account, but it's how much they're spending. So are you buying air conditioners, refrigerators? Are you going on vacations? Do you have multiple phones? Do you have a big house that you're putting goods into, or are you just scraping by? If you're just scraping by, you're not in this middle class. If you have lots of money to spend on stuff, then you're in the middle class. About a third of the world is now in this middle class. The vast majority of people are in Asia. And in the work you're doing in class, you're going to see that the amount of people in the middle class in Asia continues to grow. And the proportion of people in the world that are middle class in North America and Europe is shrinking and shrinking. So, next topic, ecological footprint. More definitions for you. So, we're talking about resources and using resources. And so the way that the world measures how many resources are used is using ecological footprint. The definition is long and kind of complex, but I really like this definition because it brings up a couple things that are interesting. So one thing is that it's the measurement of how much land and water a population needs. So this is measured in land. And I think that that's kind of a neat concept because it's like a footprint, like you're crushing the land that you're using with your foot. So it's measured in land. The land measurement is hectares. We don't use hectares in the United States, but they use them in pretty much every other country. So that's frustrating. You're going to see GHA a lot, which is global hectares of area. It's about the size of a soccer field, if that gives you a picture in your mind of how much a hectare is. So how many hectares of land, how many soccer fields are necessary to get all the resources that you're going to consume and to absorb the waste you're going to create with the technology that you have? So it's a cool measurement because it factors in how advanced are you, like technologically, and are you consuming a lot, or are you just creating a lot of waste that means that the land is getting used up? So ecological footprint, like I said, is used quite a lot as a personal measurement, but it could also be regional. It could be country by country. And there's a website where a lot of this information is held. On the flip side of ecological footprint is biocapacity. So when I said that the foot was crushing the resources and crushing the earth that you're using up, you're crushing the biocapacity. The biocapacity is how much useful stuff your area creates and how easily it can absorb the waste that you're putting into it based on that country's management and extraction tech. So the biocapacity is like, what is the world creating there? Ecological footprint is how much land is needed for the needs of the people. So biocapacity is kind of static. You know, some places have a lot higher biocapacity, like Brazil has a like off the charts biocapacity because they have the rainforest and they have really lush land and they have a lot of they just have very fertile land and lots of rivers. Other places are very resource poor. So like a lot of Middle Eastern nations, they don't have a very high biocapacity because they don't have a lot of rivers, and it's very dry, lots of sand. But ecological footprint is based on how that population is using their resources. So you might be in a resource poor area, but as long as you don't use a lot of resources, that's fine. But as the world uses more and more resources, their biocapacity is getting used up. Or to satisfy your needs, you need to use up the biocapacity of other countries that are selling you things. So it's a useful measure to say like, hey, we have this much, but we're using this much. If you're using more than you have, if your ecological footprint, your global hectares is higher than the global hectares of biocapacity, then you have an ecological deficit. So you're losing part of your biocapacity, you're losing part of your ecology, you're losing good land. So there's another chart for you. So I said that ecological footprint is based on global hectares. Another way that it's sometimes measured is number of Earths. So if we're just using one Earth worth of resources, then that's pretty good because that's how many Earths we have. The issue is that our ecological footprint since the 70s has gone up and up and up and is projected to continue going up. And by 2030, it's estimated that if we don't change our resource use, that we will get to the point where we would need 2 Earths to get all the resources needed on the planet. Again, we only have one planet. So that's a problem. So it's just another interesting measure. A couple years ago, people got tricked because IB said, how is ecological footprint measured? And the answer was hectares, and people were like, how many Earths they use up, and they got it wrong, and they got mad, as they should. Mostly I got mad. They didn't care. They were in college at that point, but I got mad. So just realize that both of these are things. Hectares, you could measure it by Earths, whatever floats your boat. So if you want to play around on this footprint network, they have a lot of really interesting graphics. One of them is you can click on countries and you can see what their biocapacity is and then their ecological footprint and see what their deficit is. So this is the United States. So here's our ecological footprint, staying pretty high. It's dipped a little recently, probably after the recession. And here's our biocapacity. And you'll notice that this, in most countries, slowly is going down because we're kind of using up our resources. We're running them dry. All right, so that's ecological footprint. We'll play around with that more in class, and we'll figure out what your footprint is. The last thing we're going to do is the availability and consumption of water and food. We'll save energy for another time because that's complex. More definitions. I promise I'm not going to just ask you to write all these definitions out, but I want you to use these terms the right way. If you use these terms the wrong way, I'm going to punish you points-wise. I'm not going to hit you or something. So, physical water scarcity. This one sounds like it would be an easy thing, like I don't have water, so I'm physically water scarce. But it's a lot more complex than that. So the standard definition is that where water use exceeds how much water you have. So you might also see it as like water is used in an unsustainable way. Physical water scarcity is all about how much water we are using. So like the example I gave earlier, you might be in a resource poor area where there's not a lot of water. But as long as you're not using much water, that's fine. If you know you're in a desert, then you need to cut back on your water use. And you can still have plenty because you're lowering how much you need. All right, so it's all about water use. You could be in an area with rivers flowing freely and still be physically water scarce because you're using up the water in an unsustainable way. And there are rivers in the United States, including the Colorado River, that don't actually reach the ocean because they run out of water before they get there. That's physical water scarcity. That's not okay. That's unsustainable. So if you leave the Colorado River alone and people use a little bit of water, it's fine. If people use too much, it's a problem. Economic water scarcity also sounds like it would be very simple. You think economic, that means money, that means water's too expensive. It could be, but it could also be other things. So economic water scarcity is where water is available, but you cannot access it for some reason. So it could be a financial capital reason, which means you can't afford the water. But it could also be like an institutional government reason. It could be that water is diverted from one social group to another social group. It could be that water is diverted from a resource poor area to a resource rich area. It could be that your country doesn't invest in bringing water to your poor area. One of the best case studies for economic water scarcity is probably Flint, Michigan. The city of Flint, Michigan is near Detroit, and it's a poor area, poor urban area. And the state government, I think, or the Detroit government decided that they would just switch what source Flint got its water from. But when they switched the the source of the water from one river to the other. What they didn't realize is that Flint's pipes that were still made of lead couldn't handle the acidity levels of this new water, and it started breaking down the pipes in Flint. And it meant that lead got into the water in Flint. And so you have a city full of poor people, mostly poor people, who now have lead in their water, and their kids are getting sick, and they're getting developmental delays. And it's been years since this happened, and there's still not fresh water in Flint, Michigan. So that is an institutional reason. Like, you could say it's financial, but it's more like the government is not providing for that community. Moving on from super depressing topics to other things. Virtual water. IB calls this embedded water. I like the term virtual water, and I see that a lot more, so I'm going to go with virtual water for now. But it's how much water is used to create stuff. It's how much water is used to create consumer goods. So anything from cotton for a shirt to feed for an animal to become a hamburger one day, coffee to roast and turn into the most delicious drink on earth. Whatever it may be that you're creating, water goes into that thing. Here's a little map for you. It's geography class, so why not? You'll notice that some areas, like sub-Saharan Africa, you might think that maybe it's hot there and they don't physically have water, but their water use isn't bad. It isn't unsustainable, but it's not clean water. It's not safe water, so it's economic. Areas of the Middle East, in desert areas, have more physical water scarcity, but again, it's based on use. So you'll notice that there are still parts of these countries where they're doing fine, but parts of rich countries where they're just using up way too much water. So more on the virtual water thing. So this has gotten increased attention because we're with the increasing global trade. It kind of means that we're trading our water away. Like, we're using our water to make goods to sell to other places. And it's not even like all of us are benefiting from it. Companies use public water to make a profit by selling those products elsewhere. So it's kind of like you're offering them your water for free to make money, and you're sitting here with less water coming out of your tap. And so a lot of people see that as a justice issue and sustainability issue, which is one of the reasons that people say they'll buy locally. So the US has this problem with a lot of goods. Alfalfa, which probably you've never heard of before, but it's fed to cows to make them produce more milk. We grow a ton of alfalfa. It's super water intensive. Almost all of it is traded to China. Soybeans sold around the world, corn sold around the world, but all of these things take up a good amount of water. And so we'll talk about that more, like how much should we kind of calculate this in water use? What can be done about it? Last slide, food security. So this would be just as complex and a big thing to talk about in this unit, but we're gonna do the food and health unit next. So we'll talk about all this stuff in the next unit. So just know that on both IB exams, you'll be asked about food potentially. One term I want you to know for now is food security. This is another one that I'm telling you because it's a little bit more complicated than it sounds. Food security sounds like, do you have food? Yes, it's in my closet. Oh, it sounds secure, good. But again, more complex. It's not just, do you have anything that's edible, but it's, does everyone all the time have access to enough food which is safe and nutritious and meets their dietary needs, and it's what they want to eat. Like, it's a very high standard. So if an area is food insecure, it might be that they technically have food, but it might be food that isn't always available. It could be food that doesn't fit their culture or their region. or that like is difficult for people to digest or whatever, what have you. Or it could just be food that they don't want to eat. So food security is a complex issue because some things are easier to grow than others, and you have to factor in culture and tradition and all sorts of interesting stuff. But as I mentioned earlier, if there's this growing middle class of people that want what they want and they have the money to buy what they want, we're going to have to keep putting more land, more water, more fertilizers, more energy into providing food for this growing population of people. So not only do we have to feed the people that are in absolute poverty, but there is a growing market for quote unquote luxury goods, like hamburger meat is like a luxury good, basically. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so that's this PowerPoint. Again, I went over time, but I hope that this has been interesting, and I hope it creates questions in your mind of like, how are we going to use water the right way? How have you seen water or food mismanaged? And like, what are the choices you're making that could affect people all around the world and could be a model for how people could live as countries develop? All right, see you in person soon.